Hello, host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People. And a person on the internet spoke to me in a dream the other night. His name was Matt Thompson. And he said in his comment, I'm sorry for this littleness here, I should have had it up to begin with, but he said in his comment that first he said meow, and then he said pia. He said, I still have very little skill when it comes to noticing them in people. Oftentimes I'm unable to tell if a person is a T or an S, F, or an N even, unless it's painstakingly obvious. I wonder if you can make a video about how to type people in everyday life, such as from speech cues or specific word choice. Yes, I can, and I'm glad you said those things specifically because one thing that one way you can recognize NE when it encounters, I've noticed there's this thing I just named it right now for this, but I didn't really have a name for it except it's sort of a tangle, and I call it a Nettie Tangle, which is when your NE overruns your TI, so that you do this sort of thing. If you're talking to somebody who's like, and then like that shit, like if I was gonna go down this thing, but look, okay, but I was talking about angle before. Remember how if you get a tangle where somebody, even if they're talking at a normal speed, and then they start to go on a tangent and then come back and go around again, and it gets tangled up and they sort of collapse a little bit, and you get a thing going on. That's NE because that happens to me sometimes, and I noticed it. I noticed it when I interview ENTPs. They do it. Zachary did it the other night, and I thought, okay, he's probably an ENTP, and these things are qualities that the ENTP is not going to necessarily be aware of, except to think that maybe in the moment, like I didn't quite get that one out. But the other thing I would say about, okay, well, here's another way you can tell somebody who is TI above NE, probably. One quality that TI people often do, I've noticed in debate, is they will begin a sentence a certain direction. They will begin a sentence one direction and then go to a second direction partway through, like I just did. So in other words, the NE Dom person is not going to probably do that. They're going to figure a way out of their bad start. Whereas a TI Dom person is going to be much more likely to do that start and then restart thing because they've determined that they've gone down the wrong beginning of the sentence path and they're going to not arrive grammatically where they want to go. When that happens to me, I find some convoluted way to get back so that it is grammatical and still expresses what I want without having to restart the sentence. And I don't know if I have a really good example of this. I could probably make one happen. Let's see. Because when those people who didn't want those people who didn't want, let's say I was going to say, I wanted to say something like this. For the people who didn't want the bad kind of cheese, they had to go over to the store they had to go over to the store next door because that was the only store in town that had that kind of cheese. So let's say I wanted to express some sort of complicated three-part concept like that. And I started on the wrong way, and I was like, they had to go there because, but for people who, okay, well, look, for people, if you're doing a lot of that, it's probably NE. But if you're not construct, like, okay, what I just did, that's NE. This is a tangle. That's a Nettie Tangle. What happened right there? Where I'm trying to wrestle too many different threads of the concept at one time, and that was a naturally occurring one. That's NE. But the TI person, it'll be more like a stem, a habit, or something like that. But of course, this is only manifest by certain people who haven't attended to their verbal tics yet. And most people at a certain point do attend to their verbal tics, so you may not see that in them. Now, one thing I will tell you for sure is that a TI Dom is going to be a lot less wordy than a NE Dom. If you're talking about ENTP, INTP is considerably less wordy. They use just as fancy words, but they use a lot fewer of them. I would also cue in onto tangents. How often does the person change topics? The most topic changey person is going to be the NE. Although a focused, smart ENTP can remain on topic successfully, it does actually take some practice, and that's true for any human being, I think, is if you want to be more successful at conveying information verbally, you got to practice it, and or visually, and or kinesthetically. I want to convey information to you kinesthetically. Why did you punch me in the face? I punched you in the face. I was merely conveying information to you kinesthetically. Do you have a problem with that? Yeah, I do. I'd rather you convey information to me orally. With my mouth? No, you orally. With your ears. With my ears? No, with my ears. Actually, you do it with your mouth is right. Okay, well, these people's conversation is getting a little bit risque. It seems to have some sexual entendres. So we're not going to go down that path because we run a clean show around here at Talking with Famous People. It's PG-17, PG-16, something like that. So what are you talking about? Oh yeah, carbon function. So here's another thing to note. If you are trying to determine if somebody is an F or a T, that can be hard. That can be really hard because there are very smart Fs out there who will be talking about T kind of stuff. Here's something I've noticed in debate. The Fs will tend to gravitate towards what are non-incisive arguments. They're broad, impact-driven arguments, and they're person-focused arguments, such that if I take here's the mistake I have to correct the F on. They'll say, well, the problem is, the T will say something like, the problem is that many of the people who get these sort of benefits will end up doing blah, 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 blah. The beginning F will immediately say, well, but some people won't. What about those people? And that's an F mistake to think about the other people. Whereas the T will say something along the lines of either they'll say, like a beginner would say something like, but that just means that it solves some of the problem. It's an equally weak argument, but it's phrased differently. And then the other thing is what happens as they get more advanced. The Fs, first of all, they become better speakers for sure, and so in terms of getting speaker points, they're much more concerned about form at that point than they are about argumentation substance, and they tend to rely on their thinking partners to do the argumentation work. This is why we have a division in public forum between first and second speakers. First speakers are Fs usually. I generally make all the Fs first speakers. They can be really good at it. They're not dumb. They're not dumb. Do not make that mistake. Fs are very smart people. They just aren't accustomed. They don't naturally gravitate towards the arguments that are exclusive, deductive, logic-based arguments. They tend towards appeals. Appeal to how much people will be hurt or how much people will be helped. Appeals to the problem. If you have somebody who's doing a lot of problem admiration, their arguments are along the lines of, these people are suffering and this has gone on for too long and we need to do something. And their key element is, look, we've got to be on the same page regarding right and wrong. Because if we all were focusing on what's the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, there'd be no way we could sit back here and look at this at this horrible suffering and do nothing about it. We have to do something. Those are very F arguments. Because, of course, they're focused on the problem and they assume the solution because their basic thing is, well, if we get together everybody on the same page about what we want to do, which is sort of their evolutionary job, then the thinkers will figure out how to do it. Okay, fair enough, and that's fine. But the problem is we do more or less agree on what to do, right, on what's right and wrong. We more or less agree on the good. What's our definition of the good is fairly. There's pretty broad consensus about most critical things. People debate a lot about things on the margins, little edge area things. But so I would look for that. I'd look for that for F's and T's. I would say get them talking about their politics a little bit, or get them talking about some slightly controversial issue that you don't really care about. You don't want to get them in a fight or anything, and see what kind of arguments they make. This is a nice kind of typing thing you can do because while some people are aware of MBTI stuff and will be able to try to interpret your reading mechanism, you could openly ask them questions about this sort of things. They'll have no idea you're doing any sort of personality typing. The other thing is when they're answering these kind of questions, watch what their face is doing. So the extroverted feeler, first of all, is going to be when you're talking. Oh, this is different. Let me do this first. Extroverted feelers are weird about facial expressions. They want to see your face when they're talking to you, and they want to see your face when you're talking to them. Now, I am somebody who does not make a lot of eye contact. I don't feel the need to look at anybody's face. I am experiencing the conversation with somebody purely on the words most of the time. So, naturally, I don't feel any compelling need to look at somebody's face when I'm talking or they're talking. In fact, I sort of think of it as more polite to not look at their face because then I'm really focusing on what they're saying and not on irrelevant things like their facial expression. My ex-wife, however, could not tolerate me not being able to see me when she's talking to me because she's getting all of her data from FE. So if you have an FE Dom, if you meet somebody who wants to look at your face, or if you notice somebody feeding off of other people's emotional reactions by watching their facial expressions, so it's like when they're little, FEs when they're small, like my daughter, they will, instead of processing the media they're watching directly, if they have a loved one in the vicinity, like my daughter did with me, she would watch my face and get the emotion processed through that. And so I would laugh at something, and she'd watch my face. And when I laugh, she'd get the emotion just like a straight channel, straight from the TV, goes into me, and then I experience an emotion, and she's watching my face and then experiencing the same emotion immediately thereafter. It's just a textbook example of what somebody who's FE does. Now, I remember I used to do more of that too, and I mentioned on a video the other night that I did it with this drumming video I caught myself doing. I was like, oh, I still do that occasionally. But look for that. Watch where people are looking. If you have a FE high in the stack, they are going to be looking at your face a lot. The other thing about verbal patterns is, I would say, you'll notice in ESTJ a certain stiffness, a certain woodenness in their bearing, and it carries through to their verbalizations as well, such that they're not broadly emotional at all. Their emotions seem almost imitation emotions because they have FI, I think, in like the fourth slot or something. They don't know their own feelings at all. They don't know other people's feelings either, and so they're gaining no intuitive information about other people's feelings. What they end up doing is and they don't really know their own. So what they end up doing is learning a bunch of rules and following them, and they're known as the model citizen type, and they really are. It's weird. They're very reliable and cool, and um, they're forgiving in a way because, well, not in a way they are. They're forgiving. They're tolerant. They don't take offense at things easily, which is nice when you're dealing with me because I kind of offend people sometimes. I tend to snap at them and yell at them and stuff, and when I have no business doing so. So I don't know. So those are a few things I'd point out. Is that if you're listening for an ESTJ, you're going to be looking for um, somebody who seems to have trouble knowing how to interact with somebody socially, but at first, especially, but as you get used to them, you realize they have their style and they're settled into it and they do it all the time. I mean, these aren't really good cues that you can generalize. It's a bit of a seat of the pants thing. I mean, I'd say what you want to do is look for the F. Look for the F fairly early on because the F will give you how high up the F is going to give you a lot of information. I've looked at eye contact as a key indicator of that right away. Not a guaranteed indicator. I would also say look to frequency of humor and frequency of laughing as an indicator of NE and or NI higher up in the stack. Either one produces it. I know. I've got my best friend Corey. He's NI, and he and I will yuck it up all day long. We both, but it's a different style of joke. My jokes are riffing jokes primarily, and they don't necessarily have an end point. I could just riff on to the next thing, and they're not little complete units. They're sort of patterns of words and sounds and facial expressions and delivery styles that coalesce together into sort of a character existing and expressing. But when Corey does character type stuff like that, he tends to be more. They tend to be comprised more of distinct ideas, and his characters tend to have like catchphrases and stuff. So, for example, Jerome, he had this character he made up called Jerome, who he was a guy who worked at a corporate building, but every time somebody said his name, no matter how far away it was in the building, he would come over and say, so he'd be like, Tom, I heard Jerome. Did somebody say Jerome? And he goes in like that. And he's always mistaking similar sounding things for his name. So he's like, yeah, I'm going to Rome this weekend. Did somebody say Jerome? Like that. He's funny guy, and much more catchphrasy. And I think that is interesting. I don't know if you could note that particularly, but yeah, if you're dealing with somebody who does little voices and characters and stuff, makes jokes and such, chances are they're NI or NE Dom, I would guess, if they're big into that kind of stuff. So the other thing you note about NE is just in general a vacillating degree of attention. So you might start talking to one, you'll say something interesting, they'll be like, let me, and then if you start talking about something that they're not interested in, they'll just sort of like look away, and they'll just sort of be obviously thinking about something else maybe, or not really thinking. Depends how good their social skills are. I've been told a lot of my social skills are bad in settings like that, but I'm not sure how accurate that is because I was being told that by an FE Dom who had very clear understanding of what things ought to be like and was better at it than I was. There's no doubt she's got better social skills than I have. That doesn't mean mine are bad. It just means I'm not FE Dom, you know? So anyway, it's something that's hard for me to tell objectively if they are or not. I know I do have, for sure, objectively, have a history of making bad first impressions. Anyway, that are things to consider. If the guy's acting like a freak and being loud and like, but also really smart, then probably ENTP or ENFP. Yeah. Hope that was a little bit helpful. I'm going to think more about it, and I'm going to come back with more better advice. Thanks for watching.